Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore and we interview individuals from the Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds to ask them the question about how they've got their sense of identity and belonging. And this week, I've got the pleasure of having, I don't know how to even describe this young man, this inspiration. He's an inspiration to me, and I know he will be an inspiration to you as well. We've got De-Shaine Murray, and he's a PhD student in bioengineering at Imperial College and Cambridge University. And he's also the founder of so many different things, but I'm just going to highlight this one, which is the African and Caribbean Research Collective, but there's so much more. Brother De-Shaine, where do we start? I'm going to ask that age-old question, which is, what is it? Where is it that you got your early sense of belonging from?
It's a good question. Well, I guess it's where do you start and where do you look? I could say I really get my belonging from my sense of, I guess, my identity and where I come from, and that comes from my home support. So from my parents and from my grandparents, the fact that I am, well, second or third generation of a Windrush, and I guess that's where the identity comes from. So I'm firmly Black British, but with the Caribbean spice all through. So
I like how you say you got the Caribbean spice all the way through. So give me a flavor of that Caribbean spice. What are we talking about? Curry powder? what spices are we looking at here?
Not just the food, the music, attitude, all of it. It's all a part of it and a part of me. And just growing up, just holding yourself to a certain standard. That's what comes with being Caribbean and being with Jamaicans specifically. And we're also a very proud people. So yeah, there's quite a few things.
Okay, so from growing up, tell me a little bit about your childhood, because I can see that your family identity is very important to you. So tell me a little bit about those early years and how that they developed that sense of your identity and your belonging and your love for the Caribbean. So give us a sense of that, please.
Sure. So I was born in South London, so in Croydon, but didn't stay there for long. So my parents and I and my sister moved up to Birmingham when I was 5 years old. But just generally, if you're looking at our family unit in general, and on both sides, there's so much closeness. So I have very good relationships even now, still with my nans who are still with us. But just generally, I think that sense of knowing where we come from has always been quite strong and always been there. And my dad is basically the family historian. So there was no way that I could avoid any of that. So I've always known where I am, who I am, where I'm coming from. And I think that's helped guide me as to where I go and also keeping myself.
I like the way that you put it. Your dad is the family historian. So give us a little bit of a sense of that family history and how he's helped to keep that family history together.
Just the importance of tracing our roots and just making sure that that's been instilled in us and keeping that and saying, okay, your grandfather's from here or your nan's from here, this is where they met, these sorts of things. And just, I think that's very important. I think especially the fact that we're at a bit of a transition period now, where a lot of the Windrush generation are beginning to die out and to pass on. So I think it's important that for those who remain and continue on, that we know where we're coming from and why we're here and the sacrifices that were made in order to get us here.
I'm going to ask, because you have highlighted about the fact that you're third generation from the Windrush, as it were. So I'm going to make the assumption that you've been back to Jamaica, that you've seen your roots, that you've been to the place of your grandfather's and grandmother's birth. Am I correct?
You're actually wrong. And
go on, explain.
My dad's actually in the chat right now, so I'm blaming him. It's something I've screamed about continuously, but I will be. Well enough for my 25th I was going to, and then COVID happened, the pandemic. So I actually haven't, but I've seen the pictures. I know the place where I know the roads, everything. So
Right.
yeah,
So
that's not going to be lost.
right, that sounds like a very similar picture to when I was growing up, and I knew about all of the places where my grandparents and everything grew up,
Mhm.
and it's a real sense of ownership when you go back.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. So when you get back, right, and I know COVID has made a mockery of a lot of things, but when you get there, you'll feel. I'm not going to say anymore. Right, I'm not going to say anymore. It will just be there, right? So that's fantastic. So I'm going to ask another quick question. Which part of Jamaica is it that your grandfather and your grandmother, where your people are from?
So they're both from Kingston.
Both
So
from Kingston.
yeah. So
Okay.
right in
Okay.
the center.
That's all right. King's capital. That's fine. Right. That's excellent. So growing up then, so you moved from Croydon up
Yeah.
to Birmingham. That transition, how did you find that transition? Was it a smooth, easy transition for yourself?
I would say it was easier for me because of my age, just
Mhm.
being five. Like,
Yeah.
don't remember much of those early days. Early days were good, but I just think generally, and I guess as I grew up a bit more, and then even would come back down here because both my grandmothers still live in South London as well.
Right.
Just seeing like the differences
Mhm.
between those areas of South London and where we ended up moving to, which is specifically Tipton in the West Midlands.
Right.
And at the time when we moved, we were one of the few Black families that were there. So
Mhm.
it was a stark difference, and that began to seep in when I started to go to school and started to have experiences that were not always of the positive kind, and
Mhm.
begin to just, I guess, have an awareness of race. And I think I had that awareness quite early on, just because of certain incidents that had happened.
Can you give us a little taster of that kind of like realization? Because coming from Croydon, quite multicultural, but I'd say Birmingham quite multicultural, but it depends on which parts of Birmingham, I suppose.
Yeah.
So explain.
So Birmingham is multicultural, but the wider West Midlands is
Mhm.
not so much. I think it's getting there,
Mhm.
as times move on and places are, well, people move, social mobility, gentrification, all of that. But yeah, at the time when we were there, we were one of very few. Um, and yeah, just generally people would, or even young kids would talk about the fact that you were Black and talk about your skin and say you're burnt or you're this or you're that.
Mhm.
Um, and just having those experiences there, I became very aware of who I was, and in the grand scheme of things, because everyone around me was white at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and I wouldn't say that I necessarily had really, really bad experience, but there was sometimes where yeah, it was a bit hard. But again, going back to what I've said earlier, having parents that affirmed you and would tell you and be your biggest support, and let you know who you are. I had that from an early age, so I was able to overcome that.
Yeah. So it was more of a bump in the, not even a bump in the road. It was just, it's the path of the course that we're traveling on. But be affirmed that you are what you are and be proud of what you are.
Definitely.
So I know your dad's on the call, so you did a good job. Trust me, very good job. And I know that you already know that, but I'm just reaffirming that as well. But in terms of when you were then in school, primary school, what was it like growing up? How many Black children were there in your school, in your class?
I think, well, at the time, there were only two of us in the class. So it was me and my friend Erin, who I'm still really good friends with today.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just the two of us. And then we had one other kid who joined a bit later on that made three. And like within the whole school, there must have been definitely less than 20. Um,
Wow.
across all, and that was in
Okay.
primary school. So
Yeah.
from then, you just saw the difference, and you kind of stood out in that sense as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't too bad, but there were instances and there were times where people would kind of try and pass their place, so to speak.
Right. 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 But were the teachers supportive? Did you get affirmation from the teachers? Because clearly you were an intelligent young boy, right? Did they help to propel you, push you forward? Okay.
I would say they did, in fairness.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a few teachers actually that from quite early on, I think it's from year 2 or year 3, like kind of identified and said, he's quite intelligent, should consider this,
Mm-hmm.
should even consider grammar school, should consider
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. And that kind of, I think, put my parents on notice to, to the fact that I was intelligent and could potentially do quite well in those sorts of settings. So I did have that. And even I think it was the school secretary was really close to me. We were really nice, and even the head teacher was really nice and supportive. And funny enough, he actually had to deal with quite a bad racist incident, and he made sure that he sorted it well and said, okay, you're more than welcome here, and dealt with it accordingly. So just generally, I did have good support at primary school level.
Fantastic. I'm not going to ask you to elaborate on the incident if you don't want to, but it's good to hear that within the school setting that they were actually nurturing your talent. They not just nurturing, but they recognized and nurtured the talent that they saw that you potentially had. Yeah,
Mm-hmm,
that's
definitely.
excellent. What about then when you? All right, so you said they kind of like put your parents on alert for potentially going to grammar school. Is that right?
Yeah.
How did you find that process? Because that sometimes for a young child can feel a bit overwhelming in terms of, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? So how did your parents help set the scene to help you to get to where you needed to get to?
Yeah. I would say I don't remember being that fazed by it. And the reason being is because I enjoyed learning and I wanted to put myself in the best possible position as well. And I kind of identified that at a young age too. And just generally from where we were, and we discussed this before on Wednesday, that the average grade of the schools around was an E at GCSE. So I knew that if I'm going to go to that school and be in that environment, I potentially may not be able to succeed and be my best self. So I was already looking at potentially where I could go for secondary school and that sort of thing. Now dealing with the process, it wasn't too hard, but I think generally with the grammar school process and with what we call the 11 plus, there is a barrier there, and it's a barrier to access generally, because I know from a lot of people that were in secondary school that they were coached from very young ages in order to pass that sort of test. And one memory that I remember specifically having was going to a tutor, and this was like the year before who was supposed to take the test, and doing like a kind of sample test with him, and him saying there's definitely something there, he's intelligent, he's good at what he's doing, but he'll never get into that school. And that school was the school that I eventually ended up getting into. But at that time, just being told that, and he was saying that it was too late in order to do that sort of thing. So looking back at it now, I realized just how much people can game a system in order to get their kids into certain education institutions, and just how inequitable it can be from a young age.
Yeah. So I totally understand your point in terms of the fact that if you're not fully au fait with the system can bypass you, even though you can be intelligent enough to have gone through the system. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. That's so. How did you feel hearing from this person? Yes, he's intelligent, but he's not going to get in. Was that like a red rag to a bull? I'm going to show you different. Or how did you then approach it?
I like proving people wrong, if I'm honest. So yeah, I think that's probably why I still remember that. So, but yeah, I did. So yeah, it definitely was.
And you got into the school.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you're not going to put a label, a negativity on me to say that I'm starting too late. I can do this. 100%. Yeah, that's brilliant. I understand that. So tell me about your secondary school. What was that like in terms of you're a young black boy going into a grammar school? How many other black boys and black girls were at this school?
Okay, so one other black boy in my year and two black girls in my year, and this is out of 160 or so. So yeah, if primary school was an interesting experience, secondary school was where I really, yeah, it was a lot. And that was a difficult one because just generally, even my experiences of racism from up until that point, people say, okay, a lot of people like to say it's ignorance, it's this, it's that. And that area of the primary school is a very working class area.
Yeah.
But you fast forward to my secondary school experience where I'm really just chilling with the children of doctors, the children of lawyers, private school, educate people as in from like middle school and lower, and they're also racist. That really just was an eye opener to me, just about how systemic and just how wide racism is. Because really, you were going to school every day and you were getting it from white people, you were getting it from Asian people, you were getting it from the mixed race people too. And it was just a very anti-Black environment. So it took a lot during that period. And it was hard. And it wasn't just hard because of being in a grammar school environment and that having the academic pressure, but also the pressure of people knowing and people actively telling you that you don't really belong here.
Wow. That in itself is something. The one, you know, you're intelligent, but everybody around you's intelligent because they've got into grammar school. Let me clarify myself. I don't want to get shot down now, right? Because they've gone into the grammar school, and you've already just highlighted the fact that for many of them, they will have been being prepped for 2 to 3 years to take one test to entitle them to get into grammar school. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were intelligent, whereas you only had 1 year and were told you're not going to make it, but you made it. So it was intelligence which was pushing you through, whereas for others it may well have been coaching to pass a test. Yeah. So let's discriminate that, or get that discrimination in place. But what you're then saying is the way in which those same children were responding to you was a clear indictment of almost like anti-Blackness.
Pretty much. Every single day, jokes, all of it. And it was just constant and repeated. I will say this, actually, there were points I used to, because I was never going to let anyone let me know that they were getting to me. So there would actually have to be points where I'd have to just go to the bathroom, cry a little bit, fix myself up, sort myself out, pray really quickly, and then go straight back in like nothing happened. But that was the sort of environment. So myself and one of my very close friends, even now, his name is Rochelle, who, we were in the same form, and we're both back. We kind of just had really similar experiences. So she would have that, but with people touching her hair and talking about, it was just, it was an interesting one. And it was a lot.
So it's very, that to me, I've heard stories before and everything like that, but it's just the relentlessness of that situation. And I heard you say that you'd go to the bar, you weren't going to show any weakness. All right, that's good. I understand that. You don't back down. But you said two things. You'd go take a little cry. That's cool, man. Big man cry too.
Sometimes you have to, you know.
All right. But you also prayed. Yeah. So faith was also important to you.
Still is.
Yeah, and still is. Right. So within the community, then. So it sounds to me within your school environment, your peers, there was this hostility, but your affirmation came from your family, the constant reaffirmation, you can do this, you are, and we know. And not only that, you had that faith of a higher power working within your life to help you to get to where you needed to be.
Definitely. But it was all that, including a conflict and a struggle, really. It was kind of like a battle between what my home environment was, where I was very much secure in my Blackness, etc. Then my church environment, very similar. And then the school environment, that being markedly different. And really just the struggle there. And it was just a constant battle in that sense.
Wow. But you made it through and you did very well. And I know you did very well because you then ended up going to, I didn't know, I'm not going to say anything about myself, but we both went to the same university, which was?
University of Birmingham.
Exactly. Right, different times, but we went to the same place. How did you find your experience there?
It felt like a continuation, if I'm honest with you. I wouldn't say it was as bad in terms of the race and the jokes that I got there. And it's funny because I should have clarified, actually, at secondary school, I was very popular. So it was a weird one where people would make jokes about your blackness and stuff like that. But they would, I don't know, even now we talk about this as, okay, well, you're talking about certain attributes of a person and kind of portraying it in a positive light, but it's actually not positive. Yeah. So when people are talking about, okay, if I'm being very specific about size of appendages and these sorts of things, and people like to make those sorts of jokes, but still be friends with you and be pally. So it was a weird one. Yeah. Now I got a bit of that again at university, and I knew that was going to be the case. Yeah. But I guess the difficulty with university is I was seeing the struggles of my peers kind of firsthand, because where I was able to navigate this environment, I was used to it. I was seeing Black kids drop out and drop out quite consistently. So there were quite a lot of Black kids at university, but they were in the arts and humanities, and they were also in the law school. So the law school is quite a big one, but they weren't in science. So again, if I'm talking about numbers, I think there were four or five of us within our year, and this is again out of 150, 160. And then as you got up through the years, you got to year 2, then you got to year 3, you would have people drop out. So then by the time it got to the master's year for myself, I was the only one who was Black who was doing the master's.
So what we're seeing, what we're seeing then is from not primary school, but from secondary school, it's almost like an incessant dripping of racism, right? And at each stage, I'm not saying that people can't cope, but it may be that you have enough. Yeah. And you really have to have that level of resilience and persistence to make it through to where you've got to, because now let's just fast forward. You got through your your undergraduate master's program, and then you've come down to Imperial, Imperial Cambridge, and you're doing a PhD.
Thank you.
I'm gonna applaud you. I don't care, right? I'm gonna applaud you. How have you found I want to kind of like move on, because I want to move on to the idea about your PhD experience and also the PhD experience of your peers, which I know is something which is really quite dear to you. So explain how it's been and why it's led you to your activism as it is.
Sure. So it's that, but times 10, because then you go into a department building or a research group, and you'll be the only one in your research group, or in my case, you'll be the first Black person who's ever been supervised by your supervisor, and you don't see people, and you can go a whole day without seeing a Black person. Shout out to Andrea, who's in this call and chat, to like, we're the 2 Black guys in our department at PhD level, and I don't know if there are any more in our whole department. And that is a struggle, and it's difficult, because you literally will go from building to building. You'll go even to a conference, and you're the only one there, and you will feel it. And other people notice too, but they'll just continue on, because that's the norm.
Can you explain when you say you will feel it? Can you kind of like elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by you will feel it?
Sure. Well, okay, I'll give one really specific example where I really, really felt it, which was I went to this conference and I was already the only Black person there. But then the topic of some of the discussions was also on antimicrobial resistance in Africa. And you had these eminent scientists, everyone was talking about Africa and talking about how we're helping them and we're doing this, that, and the other. And it just felt very white saviorist and not about actually empowering the people that were there in those positions and giving them the tools to do it, but rather we're coming across to help and then go back to our business and while we get a few papers out of it and that sort of thing. So I think just seeing all of that in real time, but then also being the only person in the room was just like, okay, what's really going on here?
So when you've been that only person, I'm going to quiz you on this because I know exactly what you're talking about. But when you've been that only person in the room, have you felt that you can be your authentic self? Have you felt that you can speak up, say something? Do you feel that you'll be listened to?
Not at all. But I'm a master code switcher though, because I've been doing it from a very young age. I've been doing it from like 10, 11, 12. So I'm able to know how to advocate for myself in those environments, but not necessarily everybody is. And at the same time, we shouldn't have to do that. I will do it because it gets me to where I need to be and it's a means to an end, but it shouldn't be that way. And often you can't yourself, like you'll see marked differences. Like you can be in research groups or you're in places where everyone's going on holiday 3-4 times a year. They're going on ski trips and it's just a completely different culture in that sense. Everyone's having wine and cheese and you're just like, this isn't me. And that can be hard. And it's about weighing that up and how do you continue through that? And I know that a lot of people don't as a result of that because it feels like it's too much. They feel like, okay, this environment is not accepting me. So how can I pursue and move forward through it?
Yeah, I totally understand you. I totally understand you. So let's look at the cold hard facts, the statistics. I remember I met you about 2 or 3 years ago now. I don't even remember them. It was about 2 or 3 years back.
About 2 years now.
Yeah. And I remember just after that, after our discussions, there was a report which came out which said about the fact that from people from African and Caribbean backgrounds, or mainly Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, that there were only, I think it was 30, is that correct?
So from Black backgrounds a whole, I think it was 245.
Yeah.
And then from Afro-Caribbean specifically, it was 30. And that was within 3 years of awarding. So there were 19,868 places, and you're telling me only 30 Black Caribbean students got that funding within that time frame. That was a big turning point for me, I would say, just generally, and seeing that.
How did that make you feel, bearing in mind what you've said about being the only one, right? And then you're looking across hundreds of university places in the UK, hundreds of thousands of PhD positions being made available, and across 3 years, 30. How did that make you feel at the time?
To be honest, I wouldn't say I had that strong reaction to it because it's like I didn't know this. I think it's just there's something about something being written on paper and being confirming what you know or confirming your reality that can be quite, I guess, hard hitting. But yeah, for me, it was just everything I had seen anyway. So you already know that you look around, you don't see many Black people, but then you have also a country here that has a rich history of Caribbean people coming here and building their lives and whatnot in very hostile circumstances, and it still continues to be hostile. But then even during the university environment, not seeing Caribbean people. So even within Black, I knew that was going to be something that would be an issue because I've seen it even in ACSs. I've gone to ACS meetings and you don't see anyone that's Caribbean at all. So this is the interesting thing also about BAME and Black, and even just looking at different demographics, because people have different stories, and
that's right.
It's important to actually hone in on what's going on with a particular culture of people as well, to know how to deal with it and alleviate the situation. But it wasn't so high in because I knew it was going to be the case. It just then it was, how do we respond?
Right. So tell me then, how do you respond? What did you do to it? I could just sit back and you can just interview.
Sure. So it was actually my cousin, because my cousin happens to also be a PhD student at the same time. So shout out to Renee. So she sent me the link of the Broken Pipeline report, which was by Leading Roots. And I saw that, I was like, okay. Then everyone started tweeting saying, I'm one of 30, I'm one of 30, I'm one of 30. And we were really just trying to find out who are these 30 people across 3 academic years, and figure that out. And then from there, we started linking up with more PhD students who were of Caribbean descent. And for me, it was really just a case of, let's organize this a bit. So I wanted to get a Twitter group, and then the Twitter for DMing and can be a bit annoying. So there was like, okay, let's get a WhatsApp group. Let's get all these numbers together, put them in a group chat, and really just talk about what we're going to do about this, or just generally have it as a group. And we did that, and that's really what led to what we now call the African Caribbean Research Collective.
So give us a little bit of a flavor of the African Caribbean Research. I just love the name in itself, but explain what it is that you do.
Sure. So primarily it's a support group, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because when we've discussed it at length, when you see the lack of institutional support for a lot of Black students, we're by ourselves, and we feel it and we know it. But there's something about having that peer support. When you can see someone who's in Newcastle, you see someone who's in Liverpool, you can see someone in London, you're having exactly the same experiences. And essentially that's what we do. So we have calls every Thursday at 6, and we really just talk about what it is to be a PhD student. We help each other, we support each other. There's times where people have been crying on the calls, there's times where people are laughing and smiling on calls, but as a space, it's a space where we can just be ourselves, and really just talk about what is a very unique experience, and then is made even more unique by the fact that we are Black and Caribbean. So that's where that started. And it's funny because the name, being African Caribbean and being quite specific on that, was also because even within that, there's intersectionality and there's nuances. So we have some people that have one African parent and one Caribbean parent. And it was like, okay, well, you're going to be part of the group, of course. And from there, that's kind of where we realized that even though we're centering the Caribbean experience here, we realized that it stretches further. So we kind of opened up the group a bit more. And then Mary and Umi, who are friends of mine, also like, let's get together and make another group. And that's where the West African Research Collective kind of formed from that. And then essentially you've got these 2 sister groups that kind of feed into each other. And we've just all been really supporting each other from them.
So it's actually, I love that. I really love that. And I'm just ashamed that I'm only, I'm too old to have had the experience which your support group is giving, because I know I've been through it. I know about being the only one. And so I would have loved to have had that kind of support available. But you're doing it, and I'm loving the idea about what you're doing. It's absolutely brilliant. But I also love the idea about the fact that you recognize that Black comes in different shades. Black comes in different sizes, and we're not trying to clump everything that's Black and say, this will fit you because you're Black. Yeah. Right. And so you're catering for all the needs which arise from the individual needs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's part of what we're trying to combat anyway. We're combating this Black moniker of just being conditioned into being a monolith, because that's not what we are.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely brilliant. But this is the problem when I only have half an hour. I have to open up the questions to the audience, but I know that there's so much more, because along with that, I know that you kind of like after the George Floyd initiatives, or the George Floyd murder, you worked on a number of initiatives, i.e. the Black in Neuro. So it's not just, give us a flavor of that, and then I will open it up to the audience. If you've got any questions, please either put them in the chat or put your hand up, and I'll come to you in a second. Thank you.
Sure. So, okay, yeah. With Black in Neuro, I think it's something that was bubbling and boiling just generally, and that was even before George Floyd's death. I think that was a catalyst, but as many of us know, that was not the origin. Even if you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2012, So this goes way back, and even before Trayvon Martin, is way back before that. I think the uniqueness of this year was you had everything that happened with COVID. People were stuck at home, and not only now were Black people seeing what this is and the constant state-sanctioned violence and that sort of thing, but white people saw it too, and there was no way of hiding from it. So I think that's really where you had a catalyst, and that's what led to Black in Neuro. And it's not the only week. There was Black Birders Week, which started as a result of Christian Cooper, if you know about the New York Central Park incident. And this really just led on. Then there was, after that was Black Botanist Week, then it was Black in Astro Week, and then I had already begun linking with certain academics in the US, and they were like, okay, we're going to do Black in Neuro Week. And I was like, I'm most definitely down, because I was waiting for something like this. And then it blew up, and that's what it became. And we've even got our second Black in Neuro Week, which is coming up on the 26th of July. And we're just looking to go from strength to strength there in that sense. And and if I be very quickly, because I know
go on.
And then, well, we talk about ICLBlack.net, which is another thing that I started. With that, it was a case of just seeing generally the lack of support that was there institutionally. And I think that's the shift, and I'm hoping that it gets to that stage where you see something that's been started, and it's been started outside of the institution, but there'll actually be support institutionally. And that really just came out of an email where I said to my head of department, people are struggling as it is, but Black students are fighting on all fronts, essentially, because we're not only dealing with COVID and disruptions there as PhD students, but there's a disproportionate effect of COVID. And there's also anti-Black racism, and a lot of people are struggling. And that was really just born out of my own, how I was feeling at the time. And then the experiences of my peers, and just knowing what some people were going through and are still going through. And that's what led to ICLBlack.net. So it's really just creating these communities and really just supporting each other.
De-Shaine, that's fantastic. It's activism. There's many people who will see it, but they won't act. But you're taking the next step, and it's not just about acting on your own behalf, but on the behalf of all of the PhD students which are going through this experience. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat. Azar, would you like to ask your question?
Is that Azra?
Azra, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just so inspired by this chat and being part of this group. And I think that I come from a different background, but I do empathize with a lot of what's being said in a different way. And just listening to it, I mean, we're all caught up in the system, and I really empathize when you said that people drop out in universities, and as you go higher up, they drop out. And I think that's not only at the system, but you only need to look at Imperial, even in staff, in jobs. People don't go up. The higher up you get in the senior positions, you've got people like my face or your face, someone higher up. We're not there. I don't need to even count numbers. And I think I just don't know. And I think I think maybe I posed the question because how do you fight the system? Because you've got people above you who I tend to describe as authoritarians. It's like, you do as I tell you. If you don't do as I tell you, then there'll be all kinds of repercussions. And you're good. You've proved that you're better, and you've achieved a lot more. And all that credit gets taken away. It gets taken. But you're blocked where you are, and I'm certainly at a point when I'm thinking, no, F this. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't fight this anymore. And I think it's been very inspiring, but also maybe finding that groups of people creating situations. And you're very, it's like, how do you find that support to carry others as well as yourself to say we won't give up?
I will say one thing. First answer to that is many hands make light work, and I've had that kind of drilled into me from a young age, just how the importance and power of collective, and having more than one person to to fight battles. Like, it's hard to do something when you're doing it on your own, but when you have a group of people behind you who are under the same banner, so to speak, it's much easier to deal with it. And I think that's part of the power of collectives. I think the second thing is to realize is this is ongoing. And what I often do to sustain myself is the fact that, yeah, I'm trying to make changes institutionally, but I'm also making changes outside of the institution. And knowing that this goes beyond just one institution, because this is, say, a national problem, it's an international problem. So it's just the importance there of, well, sometimes where things are annoying me institutionally, I still get my strength from what's happening outside of the institution. And I think I'm more recently realizing just how powerful it is to actually create your own tables rather than fighting to have a seat at the current table.
That is really helpful, because that certainly spurs me on now. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for your question. I think, Angela, have you got a question that you'd like to ask as well, please?
Hi, Wayne. Hi, De-Shaine. Yeah, I think those support groups, they sound really brilliant. I just wanted to know, as you started them, how can we or us keep them going when you finish your PhD?
That's a good question. But the important thing, well, I think anyone should be doing whenever they start an initiative is be looking for the successor or the successors, as in who comes next. And I think just by virtue of the way the collective works, specifically the African Caribbean one, we have different age groups of people, we have different people in different years. And just by them being in the calls and getting used to it, all of a sudden it's okay, instead of me leading every session, you lead a session. And getting to that point where people feel comfortable in these space environments. And funny enough, it's actually training for academia, because you have to present and you have to host and this, that, and the other, but you can make mistakes here. So with these things, I already see quite a few people in our group that are going to take this on, even after I go. I think the whole point is, though, that this is a pipeline that we are developing as well, and a network pipeline too, because as I get to the postdoctoral stage, or if I'm then looking to try and transition to faculty, I'm then a beacon point that I can lift up other people. So the whole point is that we do that and do it in unison, because I think, well, from what I've seen from older academics, they do amazing work, but they're all doing amazing work in their own little sections. And I think it's so important that we bring it all together, so everyone knows what everyone else is doing and is then able to help each other in that sense.
So is this support group, is it just for PhD students, or is it for students lower down who are just doing their first degrees?
So it's currently for PhD students and for postdoctoral students. We do have links with other who are incoming PhD students who are about to start, and we kind of like give them like the 411 and the lowdown of as to what academia is going to be like. But we're planning to, it's very hard to do all of this in addition to a PhD. But yeah, we're planning to kind of extend that hand and extend it to ACSs and kind of just really develop that pipeline so people know exactly what's coming. But we do have support in that sense, because Leading Roots, which kind of birthed us in that, this is the work that they do. And they do that through their Black in Academia events, and kind of pulling that talent and telling them, this is how you apply, this is how you do this is how you do that. So it's really just being complementary to that, and really just helping and making sure that we retain students once they get there, because I think that's a problem that institutions have not even scratched the surface on. They're trying to do all their best to bring people into academia, but as soon as we get here, we're struggling. And we're not struggling because we're not intelligent, we're struggling because we're in hostile environments.
Yeah. Oh, well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Angela. I've got Fahaz. I hope I've said your name right.
Hi, sorry, it's pronounced Paja. I know the spelling is, thank you, De-Shaine, for sharing your journey and experience. I think that I most definitely can relate. And just two questions, ending on the note of the hostile environment that whereby people of Black or African Caribbean descendants struggle in academia. I just wanted to ask, do you ever find yourself in a position whereby you have to culturally teach people how to approach matters on race within your department? Almost that you have to, it's the responsibility sort of put on you. And secondly, how does it feel being the first Black student supervised by your supervisor? Because I've sort of gone through a similar transition within my journey, and at oftentimes it feels a bit isolating and almost a pressure and expectation to communicate for all Black people and share that. And sometimes I run away from it, sometimes I embrace it, but I just wanted to sort of get a feel of how you deal with that in your department. I'm also the only Black person in my department currently, so just wanted some advice on that.
Sure, great questions. I think there's no right way of dealing with it. At the end of the day, you came here for your PhD, right? And the main thing is that you get out with your PhD and you get out with the success and what you wanted in the first place. And I think it's important to sustain yourself. And it's something I haven't been so good at times, where I find myself fighting every single battle, where sometimes I just have to focus on me and getting myself to the next stage, because a lot of the time, just you being there and in these positions is your best revenge, so to speak. But yeah, it can be hard because there just seems to be this complete lack of understanding as to the Black experience, and that's in itself is rooted in racism, and it's rooted in 500 years of history that people seem to ignore. People think, okay, well, slavery was 200 years ago, but then what happened after that? What about the colonialism? What, everything there? But I wouldn't always take on that fight, because you'll be there till kingdom come. And I think a lot of people have said it, and I think Toni Morrison said it best, in just that racism can be a distraction. And you have to be very careful that you are still sustaining yourself and getting to where you need to be before you try and deal with the problems of the system. Because as we've seen, these problems were in Wayne's time when he was doing his PhD. These problems are still here now, and they're probably going to be here 20 years later, just on a different stage. So you do what you can to push things along. And for your second question, being first Black supervised student, it's a struggle. It's not easy. It's not easy at all, because you see cultural differences. Sometimes you're generally like, oh, okay. People will often make certain assumptions about you as well. I think a lot of people, just by virtue of the homogeneity of academia, there's an assumption that everyone who goes and say you go to a party that you drink, or that and there is always this assumption that there is one culture of academia, and a lot of us don't even fit into that bracket. So it can be difficult sometimes to feel the need to have to say or to speak up or to educate. But I think it's just a case of you being able to advocate for yourself and where you feel uncomfortable, and just make that clear, and you do it in a respectful way. But just making that known, because it's important to still stand up for yourself in these places and in these positions.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
Thank you. You know what, De-Shaine, you know, me and you, we have conversations very regularly, and we can talk for hours. I'm going to just do something a little different. I've done it once before, but can I ask your dad if he's okay to come on, if he doesn't mind, please? Because one, I need to see the man that produced such a beautiful young man, and I need to just congratulate him and your mother and your grandparents for the spirit that they have given you. Because I personally, I want to put you on big screen, right? Because I need to just, you know, all credit to the family. Your son is a blessing, right? And I just want to give a big thank you for the nurture that you have given him throughout his life, which has enabled him to be a blessing to so many. And I mean, he is a blessing. To me, he is a blessing. And I know to many of the people who are in the networks which he does, they also appreciate and love the work which he does for them. And I just want to be able to say one day, yeah, I knew that guy. I knew him on his way up. And so I want to just say thank you very much for all the hard work which you've done with him. And trust me, rewards are coming. Rewards are coming because you have done a fantastic job. All right.
Thank you. It's very good.
I want to just reaffirm both of you in his presence, right? Because sometimes as young people, we think we made it by ourselves, but we never make it until our parents helped us. And so I want to give you the kudos as well, and know that he's working well on your behalf. You've trained him very well. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that.
All right, that's all right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And De-Shaine, you know that you're my little brother, right? And if I can be of assistance and of help to you in any way, then you know that all you have to do is call, because I see you doing great things and you're an inspiration. You're an inspiration to me, and I know you're an inspiration to many, many others. And, you know, sometimes we wait until people are no longer in our lives to say, oh, how wonderful they are. But I want you to know that from now. All right. And to know that whatever way we can help, I will be there to help. All right. It's been wonderful sharing the platform with you, as it always is. All right. I'm going to just say what we're coming up with next week. But another big thank you, De-Shaine.
Thank you.
So next week,
I'll come off.
all right. I think this has come up. Next week, we're going to have Stanley Adresi, who is now an associate professor at Howard University, and he's currently in the UK doing a sabbatical. He has a really fascinating story. Talk about going off the tracks and coming back on the tracks. Sometimes we don't know how privileged we are until we don't have it anymore. Come and listen to his story as he explains his prison cell to professor. It's a very, very intriguing and interesting story. And if you haven't seen if you've missed any of the interviews before, you can catch up with them on our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and you can find other interviews of the Imperial as One's Belonging series. I suppose all I have to say for now is another big thank you, De-Shaine, and keep up all the hard work. And we'll meet again very soon, I'm very sure. All right. And for the rest of you, it's going to be a hot one this weekend. So just stay safe, enjoy the sun, enjoy a barbecue or two, and be blessed. All right. Okay. We're going to stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.